Hear these words from the first letter of John. Listen for the word of the Lord. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? Little children, let us love, not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And by this we will know that we are from the truth and will reassure our hearts before him whenever our hearts condemn us. For God is greater than our hearts, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have boldness before God, and we receive from him whatever we ask, because we obey his commandments and do what pleases him. And this is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. All who obey his commandments abide in him, and he abides in them. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit that he has given us. Let us pray. Faithful God, may my words be your words. And may the meditations of all our hearts be guided by you. O God, our help in ages past, present, and future. Amen. For a time, now many years ago, Andrea and I both logged some hours working at Red Lobster. By necessity, at that point in our lives, I was what was known then, I don't know if the terminology has changed, I was what was called an alley coordinator, which basically meant I was the last person who touched your plate before it got sent out to your table. I would fill up all of the little cups of sauces, and I would stick the lemon on there to make it look nice and pretty. And so then Andrea was first a server and then worked her way up to a manager because she's just that wonderful. And so my time in food service was much shorter, and that was fine with me. But when you work in food service, you pick up on some things. And among other things, first off, you just learn some things about what happens to your food back in the kitchen. You also learn some things about human behavior. And in particular, you learn that there is a certain percentage of the population that is very, very aware that they are being served. This is a situation where they have someone waiting over them, and they are going to take full advantage. They are going to push the limits, push the boundaries as much as they are able. And so you end up with some behavior that maybe these people don't act like this otherwise. Maybe they do, I don't know. But they are very much aware of the dynamic of the server-customer relationship. And so you end up with them treating the server a certain way, and of course the server cannot talk back. So instead, as I found out, the server goes back and takes it out on the kitchen help. Thank you very much. And Andrea can share her own stories of how some of these things played out. But nevertheless, it's just interesting the type of behavior that is manifest by people when they are in, see, this is going to get rough, when they are in that kind of a situation. Now there is a not-so-secret secret among waitstaff that there is a particular shift every week that tends to be more dreaded than others. Any guesses? Sunday lunch. And you might think, your first thought might be, well, sure, that's a really busy time. There's a big crowd that comes out. It's not the crowds. The after-church crowd has a reputation. This crowd that was just in a place that was hearing things about loving others, showing kindness, peacemaking, then leaves that place, goes to another place, and doesn't do any of it. Basically. You end up, for some reason, servers experience a heightened state of rudeness from this population. Bad tipping, if there's tipping at all. Sometimes you might be lucky and instead get one of these little booklets with Bible verses in it. Thanks, that helps pay the bills. So, and then, a story that I have heard more than once. A server comes up to a table and they say to them, "We don't believe in working on Sundays." Don't think about that too long or your brain will explode. There is this disconnect. There is this disconnect that is exhibited between saying you are about certain things and actually acting on them. And the writer of 1 John is going to lay out this disconnect and address it head on. And he writes in this letter to this community, "Let us love not in word or speech." Let us not just give lip service to love. Let us not just talk about loving. Let us instead love in truth and action. And it's interesting that he pairs those two words together, truth and action. That acting on love, doing actual acts of love, that is what makes love true. That is what true love is, actually acting on what love is, not just talking about it. And then he continues. He references the commandment, a new commandment that Jesus gives in the Gospel of John. We have these 3 letters of John, and then we have the Gospel of John, and it's widely thought they're from the same tradition. They're from the same family of thought. And so this letter of John references the new commandment that Jesus gives. That he says, "I give you this new commandment." He's gathered with his disciples at the Last Supper, and he says, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you ought to love one another, and by this they will know you are my disciples." Loving in truth and in action. That is how others will know that you are my followers, that you have been sent and commissioned from me. This is how we abide in God's love, the writer of this letter says. Abiding in God's love means to actually show love to others, to love in truth and in action. And he says one other thing. He says, just as he laid down his life for us, so too must we lay down our lives for one another. Again, the various books of the Bible that we have with John's name on it, it talks about laying down one's life over and over. We've heard it from the Gospel of John just this morning, that the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And so the writer of 1 John in turn also says, he laid down his life for us, so we ought to lay down our lives for one another. This is the model, this is the example for us to follow. And we may think of this, our first thought might be that sure, Jesus laid down his life on the cross, but we might also think about the many times that he laid down his life before that point. The ways he laid down his own concerns, his own itinerary, whatever it was, in order to interact with others over and over and over again. The way that he taught, the way that he made time, the ways that he stopped to heal others, the ways that he stopped to dine with others. Over and over again, he laid down his life. And just as he laid down his life, we too ought to lay down our lives for one another. This is what it means to love in truth and action. So what does this look like for us? What does it mean for us to lay down our lives? When I was in seminary, there was a group that organized a campus-wide and students and faculty, they were invited to come, to bring their families, and we just had this big gathering on campus. And everyone was decked out in these loud, obnoxious shirts, and we had lays, and there were different games and prizes, especially for the kids. And there was one point where it was either just a giveaway or it was a prize that you could win, but a lot of the kids ended up with these plastic recorders. You know what I'm talking about when I say that? Recorder, these instruments, they're about this long, you got them in like 4th grade, and you learned how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. Okay, lots of heads nodding. So a lot of the kids ended up with these recorders. And I noticed this, and I thought back to my own elementary school years, and those were kind of fun to have. And so I just kind of jokingly broke into this tirade about, oh wow, those are great. I remember having one of those. Why can't I win one of those? I want to join in on these games too. I was just being silly for like a minute or so, and finally I was done, and I went to get some food or something. But I sensed a presence behind me. And I turned around, and there was a little girl, maybe 5 years old, holding out her recorder to me. I didn't take it. I said, no, I was just kidding around. I was just joking. You can have it. Thank you. That is very, very nice of you. Here, in her own small way, this little girl was willing to lay down having this recorder for the happiness of someone else. There are at least 2 things that are involved with laying down our lives for others. The first thing is a giving spirit, a willingness to give to others, a willingness to ask, not just in any situation, what can I get, but what can I give? What of myself can I give? Or what can I give up for the sake of someone else, for the sake of someone else's happiness, for the sake of someone else's well-being? And the second thing is humility. Laying down our lives for someone else involves humility. It involves the realization that the world, as it turns out, does not always revolve around us and our own interests. That we don't always have to be the stars of our own movie. That sometimes it is someone else's needs that take precedence over what we desire. And how can I lay down something of mine so that someone else may be lifted up? There are lots of small ways to do this. And starting small might be the best way for some of us. We can do things like spend a few extra dollars on coffee so that a farmer in a third world country can earn a better wage. We can do something like take a few extra minutes to separate out what is recyclable so that our earth can thrive just a little bit longer. We can give a little extra of what we have so that someone else can eat for a day. We can take a little bit of extra time to gather up whatever loose change we have around our house so that migrant workers can have a place to rest, to relax, to have fellowship, to have worship. We can take a little bit of extra time or give up a little bit of money so that those who benefit spiritually from our camps can be able to go again. These are some of the many ways we can lay down something of ourselves so that someone else may be lifted up. This is how we may love in truth and in action. And by this, others will know that we are disciples